Welcome to a short presentation on the history and development of the Grumman F-14 Tomcat. Now, as you all know, the DCS F-14 was released last week, and for the best part of the past week I've been reading the manual. In the next video on the Tomcat, we will take a detailed look at the Tomcat's cockpit. Guys, this is one complicated aircraft, and I hope that you guys enjoy today's presentation, and if you do, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. So why was the F-14 needed at all? Why does it look like the way it does? Was it really necessary? Well, these are the questions that we are going to explore in this presentation. In the initial years of the 20th century, air power as a means of warfighting was still in its infancy. During the Second World War, the United States did not have a separate branch for the combat aviators. The Air Force as a separate branch did not exist. The Navy, on the other hand, had been a recognized and respected branch of the armed forces of any world power for over 1,000 years. If there were any doubts about the effectiveness of air power in naval battles, it diminished after the Battle of Midway. In the battle for the island, which was the most decisive naval engagement of the Pacific War, the four Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, under the command of Admiral Nagumo, was sunk by aircraft from the US carriers Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. It was precisely this battle which halted any further Japanese offensive action in the Pacific. Even for the staunchest advocates of battleship supremacy, it was clear that air power was irreplaceable in naval engagements. Aircraft from the Grumman Company, such as the TBF Avenger, F-4F Wildcat, and F-6F Hellcat, saw extensive operations with the Navy during the Second World War. We move forward 25 years from the Battle of Midway, and now the world is in the midst of the Cold War. The US Navy was by far the most powerful naval force during the Cold War. The Soviet Union, having suffered great losses during the Second World War, was not in any position to match the US in the number of naval vessels. In the air, the Soviets were also believed to be lagging behind the West. However, by early 1950s, the first ever Soviet jet flew, and by the mid-60s, they were building Mach 3 capable MiG-25s. And the world's first variable sweep-wing fighter, the MiG-23. This showed that the Soviet Union was rapidly catching up in aerospace technology. The Soviets used their aerospace technology to counter US naval supremacy at sea. Of concern to the Navy was the long-range Tupolev Tu-95, armed with supersonic anti-ship missiles, which could be fired from hundreds of miles away. Thus, a new aircraft was needed to counter this threat, and to perform fleet air defense. The Navy's old workhorse, the famous St. Louis Slugger, the F-4 Phantom II, was showing its age. The answer to the Soviet air and land-based missile threats came in the form of Hughes Aircraft Company's AIM-54 Phoenix missile. At that time, it was the longest-ranged air-to-air missile ever produced. It had a range of 90 miles. Hughes Aircraft Company also created the radar system to guide the AIM-54 Phoenix missile. It would be called the AWK-9. Now the search began to find a suitable aircraft to house the AWK-9 radar and to carry the Phoenix missile. The tactical fighter experimental competition was started in search of a fighter for the Air Force and the Navy. Both aircraft were said to have maximum commonality. The winners of that competition were General Dynamics and Grumman. GD was to make the Air Force fighter and Grumman the naval version. Thus, the F-111 was produced. The naval variant was called the F-111B, with a shorter nose. However, the F-111B was rejected by the Navy due to the fact that it weighed too much. The aircraft could also not outturn the F-4, and visibility was poor over the front. However, the Air Force F-111s were kept in service for decades as tactical bombers. The Navy's search for a suitable fighter interceptor continued. The requirements for the new fighter were immense. It had to be able to fly unrefueled for 500 nautical miles with a full air-to-air loadout. Its top speed was to be Mach 2.4, and from the lessons learned in Vietnam, the aircraft had to be maneuverable. And any naval aircraft has to have a stable, low-speed approach to land on an aircraft carrier. The winner was Grumman. Its prototype Model 303 was selected. Grumman learned a lot from the F-111B, and they applied those learned lessons to the F-14. The winning factor for the F-14 was that it had a variable sweep wing, which would allow the aircraft to have good low-speed characteristics and have good high-speed performance. Furthermore, the wing sweep was controlled by the Central Air Data Computer, or CADC, which meant that the wing sweep was automated. Grumman also designed the wing pivot points outwards from the center of the aircraft, which meant less changes to the center of pressure during wing sweep. The maneuvering flaps and slats also gave the aircraft tremendous maneuverability. In total, the F-14 was 10,000 pounds lighter than the F-111B, and this was due to the use of titanium, aluminium, and boron. The engines were also separated, and the area in between provided a low drag area for weapons, which meant that no weapons had to be mounted on the moving wings. The F-14 also had the AUG-9 radar system, which had the ability to detect the target at 200 kilometers, and it also had the TWS trackwall scan mode. Undoubtedly, the Achilles heel of the F-14A was its TF-30 engines. They were the same engines used on the F-111B and were essentially a bomber aircraft engine. They required clean, straight air and lacked any sophisticated electronic controls. The TF-30s produced a maximum thrust of 34,000 pounds. They were not designed for a highly maneuverable fighter, which required frequent rapid changes to the throttles. These problems were solved on the F-14B with the introduction of the F-110 engines. They also had a higher maximum thrust of 55,000 pounds. So, we've come to the end of our presentation. But I could not conclude without starting a little friendly rivalry between the Tomcat and its brother, the Hornet. So which is better? That really depends on who you ask. Personally, I think that the F-18, both in the real world and in DCS world, would be on average better at most tasks for an average pilot. However, the F-14 would be better in very specific roles, such as long-range missions and long-range air-to-air engagements. The Tomcat does have longer legs than the Hornet. It can also carry more stuff. And now, what do you guys think about the Tomcat and the Hornet? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching.